Francois Bernier. Francois Bernier was a French. He was a doctor by profession. He was a political philosopher and historian. He came to Mughal Empire in search of opportunities. He lived in India for 12 years from 1656 to 1668. He was a physician to Prince Dara Shikoh, the eldest son of Emperor Shah Jahan. Bernier traveled to different parts of the country. He wrote accounts based on his own observation. He compared the social condition in India with the situation in Europe. He dedicated his works to Louis XIV, the King of France. His works, Travels in the Mughal Empire, published in French. It translated into English, Dutch, German, and Italian. Travels in the Mughal Empire. His work, entitled Travels in the Mughal Empire, it provides detailed observation and critical insight. He constantly compared Mughal India with contemporary Europe. He emphasized the superiority of the European society. The question of land ownership. According to Bernier, one of the fundamental differences between Mughal India and Europe was the lack of private property in the Indian society. He had firm belief in the virtue of private property. Crown ownership of land was harmful for both the state and its people. He thought that the Mughal emperor owned all land and distributed it among the nobles. Bernier argued that due to the crown ownership of the land, landholders could not transfer their land to their children, so they were not initiated to make to any long-term investment in land. The absence of private property prevented the emergence of the class of improving landlords. It had ruined the agriculture and oppressed the peasants. The living standards of the all sections in the society declined except the ruling aristocracy. Bernier's description on the social condition. Indian society was consisting very rich and powerful ruling class. There was a wide gap between the poorest of poor and the richest of the rich. He says there is no middle state in India. Bernier's description on the Mughal emperor and his subjects. The Mughal emperor was the king of beggars and barbarians. Mughal cities and towns were ruined and polluted with ill air. Its fields overspread with bushes and full of pestilential marshes. He attributed all these problems due to the crown ownership of land. The idea of Oriental despotism. Bernier's description of land ownership influenced Western theorists. The French philosopher Montesquieu used Bernier's account and developed the idea of Oriental despotism. According to this idea, in Asia The king enjoyed absolute authority over his subjects and owned all lands. There was no private property. All people, except king and nobles, struggled for survival. The concept of Asiatic mode of production. Karl Marx further developed the idea of Oriental despotism as Asiatic mode of production. He observes that before colonization, surplus production was appropriated by the state. This led to the emergence of a society that was composed of a large number of autonomous and egalitarian village communities. The imperial court respected these villages as long as the flow of surplus was continued. Marx regarded this as a stagnant system. A more complex social reality. Bernier's description occasionally mentioned the complex social reality. Artisans had no incentive to improve the quality of their manufactures because their profits were appropriated by the state. Manufactures were everywhere declining. At the same time, he agreed that vast quantities of the world's precious metals flowed into India. Manufactures were exported in exchange of gold and silver. He also noticed the existence of a prosperous merchant community. Mughal cities. During the 7th century, 50% of the people lived in towns. Bernier describes Mughal cities as a camp town. These were dependent upon imperial patronage. There were all kinds of towns: manufacturing towns, trading towns, port towns, sacred centers, pilgrimage towns. The existence of towns indicates that the prosperity of merchant community. They were organized into their own caste, come occupational group. In Western India, these groups were called Mahajans. Their chiefs were called Seth. Use of slaves. Slaves were openly sold in market. Slaves were also exchanged as gift. Ibn Battuta purchased horses, camels, and slaves as gift for Sultan. Some female slaves were expert in music and dance. Female slaves were also used as spies. Slaves were used for domestic labor. The price of female slaves were very low. They were usually used for domestic labor. The practice of sati. Bernier has provided a detailed description of sati. He noticed that while some women embraced death cheerfully, others were forced to death. He also noticed the child sati, which a 12 years old young widow sacrificed.